Do you need a patent before you launch your product? This comes up a lot, and the answer is more nuanced than people realize. So let me walk you through exactly how to think about it. The short answer is no. You don't need a granted patent to launch. A granted patent takes several years at least, and except for very limited circumstances and industries, nobody's waiting that long to launch. But here's what you do need to think about. The moment that your invention becomes public, the patent rules kick in. In the US, you get a 12-month grace period to file your patent application after the first public disclosure or sale. Internationally, in most other countries, there's no grace period at all. Once it's public, your window for filing a patent is closed. So the real question isn't, do I need a patent to launch? It's which of my pre-launch activities actually counts as a public disclosure, because that's what impacts patent rights and options. Not everything you do before launch counts as a public disclosure though. Let's walk through a few possible scenarios and discuss how they relate to the rule on public disclosures. In reality, these situations are heavily fact dependent and there's no way to perfectly assess every possible scenario. But this will at least give you some context and points to consider as you assess your own situation. First, a live demonstration of your product to a room full of people where there isn't a non-disclosure agreement or clear expectation of privacy. This is likely considered a public disclosure, even if it's just a small event, and even if nobody records it. You described your invention to people who had no obligation to keep it confidential. That's likely going to start the grace period. Next, let's say you're pitching to investors. This one's going to depend. If you're pitching under a non-disclosure agreement or a clear expectation of privacy, that's likely not going to be considered a public disclosure. However, let's say you're pitching at a pitch competition or you're sending your pitch deck around without any confidentiality agreement. That might be considered a public disclosure. Some founders assume that investor pitches are automatically private, but that's not necessarily the case. Now let's say you're beta launching your product with select test users. If those test users signed a non-disclosure or confidentiality agreement, you're probably fine. But let's say you opened up signups on your website and let anybody from the general public in. That would likely be considered a public disclosure. Now let's say that you're having a conversation with a potential co-founder or a contractor that you're potentially going to work with. That's generally not a public disclosure, especially if there's a non-disclosure or confidentiality agreement. But if you're posting detailed technical descriptions in a public forum, that's likely to be considered a public disclosure. Similarly, a published paper or a blog article or even a social media post that describes how your technology works, if the post explains the invention in enough detail that someone skilled in the field could reproduce it, that can count as a public disclosure. A general rule of thumb is, if someone outside of your confidential circle could learn how your invention works from what you've shared, you should treat that as a public disclosure. So here's how to think through this decision for your specific situation. You want to ask yourself these three questions. First, am I about to do something that puts my invention in front of people who haven't signed a confidentiality agreement? If yes, you might consider filing a patent application before that happens. Even just a provisional patent application lets you preserve your rights and options just in case. And second, is my market just the United States? Or could this product potentially be sold internationally? If there's any potential for entering international markets, you want to file before any public disclosure, not after. The US grace period will save you in the US, but it's not going to help you in most other countries. And third, do I have enough of the invention figured out that I can describe it in detail? You don't need a completely finished product to file at least a provisional patent application, but you do need enough detail to at least describe what makes your approach different. If you can explain it to a friend on a whiteboard, you probably have enough detail to at least start with a provisional patent application. If the answer to those first two questions is yes, and you can describe your invention in enough detail, file a provisional patent application before you make that public disclosure. That's going to be the safest way to preserve your patent rights and options, just in case. And if you happen to be at the point where filing a provisional patent application might be a good option for you, I've got a checklist that'll show you exactly what you need to have ready for that. You can grab a copy with the link in the description. I've also created a step-by-step tutorial on how to file your own provisional patent application, so you can check that out as well. And that'll at least get you covered before you share any details about your invention publicly. So here's what to take away from this. You don't need a granted patent before you launch. But before you share any details about your invention publicly, take a few minutes to figure out whether or not that would be considered a public disclosure. If it is, consider filing a provisional patent application first. It takes less time and costs less money than founders realize, and it keeps your options open. And if you want help figuring out the right timing for your specific situation, feel free to reach out. Until then, I'll see you on the next one.